The idea behind the show is simply asking guests what they would tell a stranger on a plane if they were sitting next to them and the stranger asked them for advice.
The scenery is passing very fast, but the seer is constant. The one who's seeing is the same.
Let me appreciate you for asking a question that I haven't been asked after 2,500 or so interviews over the years.
Is you have to drop the ego, which is everyone's greatest obstacle.
In 2008, Grant and I had been married for 4 years. I was pregnant with my first child. The economy was collapsing, and we were on the verge of losing everything financially.
Hello, everybody. It is Keri Poirier back with the newest edition of the show. Excited to have a returning guest with me, not a first-time guest, a returning guest. So Richard Paul Evans. Richard, I'm so excited to have you with us. Richard, I know this is a bit different probably than most interviews, but I usually get the guests to tell us a little bit about themselves versus me reading a bio, just because I feel like you get to see where, what part of their life they talk about or what part of their career. And so are you able to tell us just a little bit about yourself before we jump into all the new exciting things you're doing?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm a novelist. I've written 46 New York Times bestsellers, and I have 7 TV movies and my first feature film last year. If you saw it, starring Justin Hartley. It actually was the #1 Netflix movie in the world, and it was called The Noel Diary. So I've had a good career. I've sold almost 40 million books worldwide, and I'm also the founder of the Christmas Box House International. It's a charity that helps abused, neglected, and trafficked children, and we take care of them. We do the hard part. We take care of them after they're taken out, and it's been an amazing ride. We've helped almost 140,000 children, which is enough to fill Madison Square Garden 6.5 times. So, and it just keeps growing. So that is, my passion and something that's growing as well. So that's me. I have 5 children. They're all grown. My daughter, Jenna, is a best-selling international author as well now. And she pretty much did that on her own. She's super famous in Brazil and Portugal, where she's one of the top 10 authors in the country. And when she goes to Brazil, she has to have bodyguards because thousands of people flock her. So it's fun to watch her. And my other daughter's a doctor, and one does makeup for movies, and another is be a pharmacist. And then my son is a sushi chef. So they get all over. They have a lot of different talents.
That's amazing. Like, I was curious because I didn't know what they all did. So that's so cool. And it's so cool probably as a parent to watch them thrive in different fields. And I have to say, so even starting right away with the Noel Diary, my girlfriend and I both read the book and watched it. And you wouldn't know this, but just this past week, like literally less than a week ago, her father passed away. And he was my father-in-law, but really like a father to me. In fact, his service was earlier today. And so we were reading through your book, The Noel Diary, and I was saying to Shelley, the part whenever he's cleaning through the house, like going through the stuff, that part, when I read it, it was powerful, but it didn't hit me in the way it did after her father passed and we started looking at stuff. And so it's so wild how that is so universal and how you can connect with somebody once they've lived that part of the story. But honestly, it was like it came back and hit me. The book came back and hit me like, 2 months later, which is, I just want to say that's how powerful your writing is that all of a sudden when she's looking through the stuff, I started thinking about the record player because he loved Elvis and, the record player in the story. And anyway, I just want to say, to me, that's the power of story.
Yeah, we want to catch slices of life that people can relate to, and get them thinking about their own life and their decisions, and that's what we try to do. So I'm glad that worked for you.
Yeah, it totally did. And so, this is probably a good starting point. But obviously, as you talked about the amount of books you focus mostly on novels. And so what I'm curious about is, I know I don't want to talk about this today, but you have a children's book out now. That seems like, for some people, a big sort of detour in a different direction. So I guess the question is, why a children's book? Why now?
Well, it's not my first children's book. I actually the first children's book I wrote was probably about 15 years ago, and I did it to raise money for abused children and for our charity. And so at the time we were really struggling. Our first shelter was way over budget, more than $1 million over budget. And so I started writing these children's books, and they did really well. One of them, The Dance, sold 500,000 copies. It was massive. And so that's how the children's book started. But then I just kind of let them go, focusing on my novels. But this one actually is 18 years in the making. So it actually in some ways preceded the other children's books. It was based on my son when he was in the hospital. And it was a really difficult time. And we can talk more about that later. But I was waiting for him to grow up. And that time came. And that's when I wrote the book, My Son Lives in a Tree.
Hmm. And so I guess, I was going to ask you the inspiration, but I guess that, that is the inspiration behind the book.
Yeah, it's much deeper than that. It was dealing with some mental health problems. And he was only 7 years old, and it was really difficult. We don't talk about that much in culture. And it was at a point where we needed more help than we could give. And so he went into a residential treatment, and it was awful. They were great. They did what they're supposed to do, but it was an awful experience as a parent. I'm walking through there, and he said, "Dad, are you putting me in gel?" And I go, "No, son, this isn't gel." He's a little boy. And he goes, "Well, it feels like gel." And I walked out of the place without my son, and I vomited. I was so emotionally distraught. I went up to see him every day. He was there for almost 3 months. And every day I'd go to see him and visit him. And then we created this little routine because his window overlooked the parking lot. So he would stand against the window like that and look out. And I would drive around twice around the parking lot in front of his window, honking the horn like a fool. And I do that every day. So one day I'm driving to see him, and the street I pass goes up to the zoo. And this entire poem came to me. My son lives in a tree. And usually I don't remember these things that well. This one never left me to this day. It stuck with me in such a way. And so I knew I would eventually publish this book when the time came, but I waited 18 years.
Wow. It's been 18 years since that happened. I didn't realize that's.
Yeah, 18 years.
Wow. And so I heard you recite the poem, and I was blown away because I don't think I've ever been able to recite a poem. And I guess, we see with a prayer, somebody can remember a prayer their whole life. We see that. But outside of that, I've never been able to memorize any poem that I've ever read. And so when you did that, I was fascinated. I thought, has he practiced it over and over again? But you're saying it never left. It was just you knew it from day one and never forgot it.
Yeah, but the more times you share it, obviously you get better at it, and it starts to put the little grooves in your brain, so you can just say it. So, but it was really special to me. It was meaningful. In fact, I read it to the radio show host Glenn Beck, and at the end of it, he got teary-eyed. He literally wiped a tear from his eye, and he goes, "My son is in the tree." And so there's a deeper meaning to this book, and one that I think is very powerful. And for anyone who is facing challenges with a child, which are millions, I think the book will have meaning to them.
Yeah, well, and honestly, in some ways, we're going through that right now because we have what I guess people either call a highly sensitive child or an empath or a crystal child. But we have a child that is very sensitive. If he sees you crying, either he'll start crying or he has to leave the room. And so now, I just referred to it a minute ago, but he lost his papa. And so he doesn't know how to process that really. And so, it makes me think I'm going to reread the book in the next day or two. But we were struggling with it because, how do you tell a 6-year-old who really doesn't fully understand that? And we did, and he gets it, but he's dealing with between sort of a little bit of aggression and then I want to be alone and kind of be with my thoughts. And it's wild to think of a 6-year-old having to carry that much burden and weight. So I guess, for me, it's sort of really present awareness for me is right now, there is that challenge we have with our child.
Well, sometimes, the challenge can be all over the place. I've had people, the book is just coming out. But we did a lot of testing on it. And the things we found is that, first of all, when people heard the story, they loved it. In fact, an audience of 100 people would sell 220 copies. So it was really strong. It was really strong. And that's unusual. Usually you sell about 40% of an audience, if you're lucky, so people would tell me, it's like, well, my son just left the military and, I feel like he's in the tree. And it's the idea of how when we have someone close to us, one of our children, they leave for whatever reason. One woman told me her son was a drug addict, was homeless, and wouldn't talk to him. And so there's a lot of different ways we relate to it. And it is about reaching out and connecting, and it's about love ultimately. So it's like, it's a funny book, it's whimsical, but then all of a sudden it kind of hits you in the gut at the end.
Mm. And I guess when you did those, I mean, I know I was at a retreat where you shared it with us, and I know, I don't know how many copies you sold then, but it seemed like a lot, because I know we bought a couple, and it really resonated with us. But do you find that people, when they get to the end, that's when it kind of all hits them, the power of the book, or does it all the way through?
Yeah, no, well, the thing is that when you have shared it enough times, and I probably shared it several hundred times, you know where they're going to laugh. And the book is funny. I mean, there's always, when I talk about leaving a bad review on Yelp, they always laugh. Or, my friends pick out my fleas, they laugh. But that's what, I learned something as a speaker, that, my books tend to make people cry, right? That's why they make Hallmark movies out of them. That's why they make these moving movies. Someone asked my wife what I do for a living, and she said, I make people cry. And what I learned is when I'm speaking is that there's not a long distance between laughing and crying, that once you get the emotions up. And so for people to be laughing and think this is a really funny book, and kids love it. I mean, one woman told me she's read it to her grandchild more than 100 times, because every time she comes, she goes, Grandma, would you read the monkey book? Calls it the monkey book. And she goes, I'll read it 3 or 4 times. Every time he comes over, he just loves it. He doesn't want to read anything else but the monkey book. And so when you get their laughter and they're having fun with them, but then you get to the end and every parent can relate to it. And it is, when you say it, people usually gasp. They go, oh, or what they do is they go, oh, that's how they end. And I now just expect it, because after 100 readings, and it happens every time, exactly how people are going to respond to it.
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting on the Hallmark movie side of things, when you say people, what you found is, you make people cry. And my girlfriend, when we were going to your retreat, she didn't know yet fully. She knew your work, but she didn't realize whose retreat we're going to. But what's fascinating to me is she started counting through and seeing how many Hallmark movies written based on your books that she had watched before she knew your writing. And it was a lot. And now I took this as a compliment. Her and I were driving not that long ago, and I told you about a book I had written, and I've actually written part 2 and part 3. It's like it's a series, which I didn't plan. Okay. And it's all tied together. And when she was reading the 3rd one, she goes, when are we going to approach Hallmark? So I was like, I've done something right. By the 3rd, awesome. She's seeing it as Hallmark movie books. But she's a huge, and I think she shared that with you, she's a huge Hallmark movie fan. Like, all season she watches Hallmark movies. And yeah, she said, I knew his work intimately without realizing I knew his work intimately. So, again, to that point, you made her cry, I think, quite a few times.
Oh, that's funny. I actually have a few cameos in the movies. So it's, in fact, I play the author in, I think it's a Mistletoe Inn. And so it's like when they asked me to be in, I said, no, my kids mocked me the last time. My movie A Perfect Day with Christopher Lloyd and Rob Lowe, which is, a thrill to have those actors that are that big. So I play this little role. My kids just laughed. It's like, you look like Pee Wee Herman, Dad, walking through, and paging Mr. Herman, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, I'm not going to do this again. But they asked me to play an author, and I thought, well, I can play an author. Okay, so so that's so I actually flew up to Canada for that, and did the movie. It was funky, because we go in, and it was summer, but they had fake snow everywhere, so it looked like, and they had decorated for Christmas, so it looked like,
That's so cool. Well, and I mean, one of the other things that I think is really powerful here is you're donating the royalties to charity, and we don't hear that a lot either. So I'm curious what prompted that.
Well, okay, this is, and I hope you take this the right way, this is something really weird happened with this book. It's the reason that I'm self-publishing. When after I I wrote the book, and it's like, it was 18 years. I sent it to my agent. I said, it's time. She took it to my publisher, and they rejected the book. And it's like, I've sold 40 million copies, and you rejected one of my books. And I said, like, why would they do that? This is one of my favorites. And they said, well, they say it's racist. I go, what? You're calling this racist? And it's like, well, yeah, because you can't talk about monkeys and children, or else you're really talking about Black people. And I said, that may be the most racist thing I've ever heard. Listen to yourself. You sound insane. And they said, well, let's explain. I said, no, let me stop you right there. You drank the Kool-Aid. You've lost your mind. You're part of this insane society we're moving into. And in 10 years, you're going to realize just how stupid you sound. So, you know what? I take the book back. You're not allowed to publish it. And I said, you know what? This is a good thing. My first book was rejected. The Christmas Box sold 8 million copies. It was the #1 movie in America that year. The next book that was rejected was Michael Vey. So far, 3.5 million copies around the world. I said, so now you rejected this one. So this is a good sign, actually. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to publish this and give away all of my royalties, all of them, to help children. And so that's how it started. I love my charity. I love giving back. And my wife's down there at this very moment. She's down there sorting through clothing and donations with the group of women that she pulled together. It's part of our life. It's part of our family. This extended family of thousands of children. So that's how it came about.
Yeah, and so I mean, being self-published this book, and I mean, I'm just curious your thoughts on this, but with a self-published book, how tough would it be to make the New York Times in comparison to the other books? Because obviously,
really tough. Yeah, really tough. I don't expect to make the New York Times. I don't really care either. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily matter. With publishers, it's kind of a bragging rights to them.
Yeah.
They want to look at it and see that there's a Simon & Schuster author who's in the top 10, right? So it matters more to them than me. It used to matter a lot to me, but after 46 New York Times bestsellers, it's like, what's another one, right?
100%.
I just want people to read the book. So
yeah, and I honestly, when I asked the question, I didn't think it mattered or would matter, but I was just thinking, I wonder, as a self-published, I think it's. I know people have done it, but my understanding is it's very, very, very difficult with a.
Well, it's hard. My first book hit the New York Times bestseller list, but it was only because the distributor that reported to them sold more than 80,000 copies in 1 week. And so it didn't matter that we were only in 5% of the bookstores. It sold so much, it just shook the whole publishing world. The only one we didn't beat was Michael Crichton, who had the movie in, it's one of his movies. He did Jurassic Park, and that was the only book that was ahead of it. Okay, so that shook the world. But it had to sell 80,000 copies to do that in 1 week. No one does that. I mean, that's massive. So the thing about like the Times, they have their own formula, which they guard very closely. I mean, it's as much a secret as the recipe of Coke. Coca-Cola, they just don't let it out. So if you try to manipulate it, they'll catch you and they'll throw it off the list forever. So you have to be really careful about it.
So I'm just curious, and I want to get back to the main book, but I'm curious when you mentioned that it sold 80,000 copies. I'm just thinking more for somebody that might be listening that's an author and is fascinated by that. What prompted that amount of sales in a week?
It was all viral. It was pure viral. In fact, I had someone tell me they were using it as an example in their Harvard marketing class. It was before social media, and it was truly viral. I remember there's a lady in Wyoming who had a lot of little stores. One little store sold 5,000 copies. One store in a tiny town called Roy, Utah. And they sold more than 5,000 copies, actually. I remember a little store in Wyoming. They ordered 1 copy of the book. And my distributor sent them a dozen, a little tray of it. They call them a dump. And she was furious. She called back. She goes, I ordered 1. You guys are cheaters. And they said, look, hold on to the book. We'll pay for shipping back. Just hold on to the book for one day. Well, she called the next morning. She goes, I need 200 more. She goes, I sold out of those 12 and I had people already came back to order more. It was the kind of book you read and you needed to have more of them. So the only book that I've seen that had that direct response so far has been the Monkey book. My son, this new book. When we share it with people, the average sell in the room, like I said, is 2.2 copies per person. And that's the Christmas box would do that because people would buy multiples. Same thing. I'll talk to 5 women, they'll buy 14 copies.
Wow.
It's a matter of getting it out there.
Well, this past Friday, I was interviewing Neil Donald Walsh, who wrote Conversations with God. And
of course, yeah.
He was talking about how that book, when I said, why do you think it was so successful beyond the fact that universally we could all relate to the conversation? He said it was a hand-to-hand book. That's what he called it, but a hand-to-hand book. He said when people bought it, they were literally like, okay, as soon as it was in their hand, they had to give it to another hand. Whether they bought it for somebody else or whether they handed it to somebody else, he said it was a hand-to-hand book. And he said it sold 15 million copies, but he said his understanding from the research they did is that probably 45 million people read it. So that could be used bookstores and sharing their copy and everything. But, to that point, I mean, I've heard it called a pass-along book as well. But it sounds like that's what the Christmas box was, and it sounds like that's what this book could be as well.
Well, and I priced it in a way that people could share it, and it really just went nuts. I mean, to go to every book signing and have 1,000 people turn out was just insane. And I probably will never have that happen again. I mean, it was one of those rare books. I remember USA Today did a list of the 20th century, the biggest books of the 20th century. And it was listed in the top 20 books of the 20th century in terms of sales.
Wow. Well, this brings up another question. I think you kind of touched on it a bit, but having that much success the traditional publisher route, you mentioned some of the reasons why self-publish. Is there any other reasons? Like I know you mentioned, what the publisher said. So you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this on my own. But is there any other either benefits or reasons why you thought self-publish does make sense either way?
Well, the thing about publishers, they're going to get you the distribution. They're going to get it out more. It depends how you're selling your book. If you're doing it through yourself, I mean, someone at Glenn Beck Enterprises said to me, it's like, we sell 98% of the books come through us. Why would we go to a publisher? And because as a publisher, you make 15%. It's like, why would we even do that? They're not driving the sales, we are. And, here's a platform of more than 25 million people. So he truly is. And that's the question, why would we do it that way? There is, the other reason is I had an NBA All-Star, Markey, who's passed away since then. But Mark always wanted to be with a big publisher. And I met him at a Christmas party, Mark and his wife, Keri. And he was almost $100,000 into his book, still had no book. He was being ripped off by another one of these companies who take advantage of authors' dreams. And I said, well, you know what, I can help you. And we had a book out in less than 6 months. And the first week he made $100,000 off his book, the first week. By the end of the year, he had made $500,000. His speaking events, he raised his speaking fee by $10,000. He was up to $30,000 a speech. And they were required to buy his book. So, I mean, in an audience, he was making about $18 a book. And so if 1,000 people, he'd make an additional $18,000. So he's making between $50,000 and $60,000 an event, per day. I mean, that's a lot of money. And then he gets approached by a major publisher. This is after he's been doing this for 6 months. And they said, hey, we want your book. We want to sell it. And he called me. He goes, I thought that's what I want. But if I work with them, I'll make $3 a book. I'm making 6 times that and I'm driving. He goes, why would I go with them? I said, good question. Why would you go with them? And he goes, I don't think I will. And he never did. He never went with them, and he was happy with what he was doing. He was enjoying it, and he made a lot more money self-published. So that's one time when I would say definitely do it. So I'm helping a gal with her book right now. It's kind of like A Child Called It, if you're familiar with that. It was on the New York Times for 5 years. In fact, Dave Pelzer, who wrote that, is endorsing the book and mentoring her. And she's going to use the book in the same way Markey did. She speaks all the time. She gets requests to speak. And she has people lined up to buy her book already. And so, in fact, I'd love to get her on your show sometime. You'll love it. Her story's fascinating. It's gut-wrenching. But she's now the executive director of the Christmas Box House. And she knows what these kids go through. She was tortured and raped and everything through the system. And so in her case, it's like, yeah, I could sell it tomorrow. right, to a major publisher. But it's like, you know what, let's just take it out and let's publish it, and let's just see how people respond, and let's learn. And then we can make a decision later. Because that's what I did with the Christmas box. I had sold more than 500,000 copies when I turned around and sold it to a major publisher. And you know, the advance check on that was $4.2 million just for the hardcover rights in the US. And I sold 20 other countries. So people say, once you self-publish, you can't publish mainstream. No, that's not true at all. In a way, you tested it for the publisher. So, and if you think of a commercial marketing, you see all the time, someone will come up with a product, and whether it's Snapple or some drink or some granola, right? They take it out, they test it, it does well, and you'll get a company like a major company like Coca-Cola will come in and then buy it out. And the reason being is that when a company comes out with a new product, it has less than a 2% chance of surviving. Okay, less than 2%. So if they can find something that's already working, all the test marketing has been done, they step in and buy it. Yeah, they have to come out with more money for it, but it's much more efficient. And that's why you see major companies buy out these smaller companies that have already gone and proven a product. The same is true with books.
Well, and just that you're to demonstrate that you're in good company. The Alchemist started as a self-published book. I don't know what it sold now, like 100 million copies or something crazy like that. He sold like 300 million books now, Paulo Coelho. And then, as you know, I do some work with James Redfield, who wrote the Celestine Prophecy. Right. And James hit 100,000 copies sold in 6 months, and same deal. He had a bidding war for his book. But that kind of proves the fact that you don't have to go with the publisher. You're not lost if you don't, but you definitely have to prove the sales.
Well, yes, and I told the USA Today about their list. Well, the #1 book of the century in sales was Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus by John Gray. That was self-published. He was taking that trunk of his car and selling them to bookstores and doing whatever events he could before. And then by the time he sold it for millions, and then the book continued to make millions. So that is one way to do it. And by the way, as you know, Corey, I actually have an author mentoring program that's free. You can get into it, and we have such a beautiful community. Someone told me all their friends are in there. It's a true community of positivity, and we're getting books published like crazy. So, but it's called Author Ready. You can go to authorready.com and join for free, and it's growing really fast. We have just about 2,000 members right now.
I'm one.
And it just keeps growing. So it's that's one way we protect people from what's going on out there.
And so one last quick question on the author side, and then I want to kind of circle back and finish off with the new book. But what you were just talking about the author side, and I know you worked with another gentleman who we got to meet at your retreat with his book. Is that something you're spending more time doing now, is helping authors with their book, launching their book, that type of thing?
Well, I started a publishing company, and it's doing really well. I think the first book we did has sold $500,000 so far. And wow. It's doing really well. And what I do is I look at books that have platforms. I look at it as that, can I sell this book? And so all the books we have already have ready platforms. And it's like, if we don't make money immediately, we'll make it eventually. And so the idea is get all these streams of income coming in. But I love all the books we have. I mean, they're all going to do well. And I think we're going to have some breakthroughs. I think it's going to be a very big company. I think it'll be a multi-million-dollar company within a year. That's my belief of it. So it's doing really well. I'm really happy with what it's called. Ascent Publishing, and then I work with Simon Schuster to publish my other books. Also Gallery, which is a division. That's where I do my novels. So, but self-publishing and publishing is a lot of work, and you have to decide if you really want to go to that. My novels, because I don't want to spend the time marketing them. I want to spend the time writing them. That's why, and I make a lot of money off them. So that's why I just go direct with the publisher.
Amazing. Well, I want to ask you as we, last few questions, but one thing on the new book is, what do you hope the legacy of the book will be?
Well, the right children's book can last forever. And I think it can bring parents and children together. I don't know if we have time, but I can actually share the book with you in less than 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm all in.
Would you like to hear it?
Yeah.
Okay. And as you know, I have it memorized. But
yeah.
the artwork was done by this wonderful British author named Andy Catling. And so I can show it to you. It goes like this. A week ago, or maybe two, I took my family to the zoo. The day was nice. The sky was blue. It seemed to me the thing to do. No sooner there, I heard a shout. Someone's let a monkey out. I looked to see who caused this fuss. The shouter pointed right at us. And then the keeper of the zoo did what it is that keepers do. He grabbed my son, that rotten louse, and locked him in the monkey house. And though I stomped and yelled with rage, they would not let him from the cage. Go ahead and turn the page. Hashtag free the boy, I wrote online. You cannot have this son of mine. I'll call my lawyer and the news. Grown boys do not belong in zoos. I fought for him both tooth and nail to free him from that monkey gel, but nothing I did seemed to help. I left a bad review on Yelp. So every day I went to see my son up in that monkey tree, hoping that I'd get a glimpse of my boy among those smelly chimps. And then one day my son dropped by, swinging wildly from the sky. To my surprise, he looked just fine, clinging to that ropey vine. Don't worry, Dad, my son did say. It's not so bad. I want to stay. And here I do just as I please. I spend my days up in the trees and swinging with the hairy bunch. We eat bananas for our lunch. No mom or dad, not anymore, to tell me not to slam the door or wipe my feet or eat my peas. For snacks, my friends pick out my fleas. No, where's your homework? How's those grades? No going out till beds are made. So thank you, Dad, but I'm just fine. I gotta go. Here comes the vine. And that is how it came to be. My son now living in a tree. I still don't know when he'll come home, and that is why I wrote this poem. For though he says it's lots of fun, it's not for me. I miss my son. And then the artist, I love it. He added this for me. He showed the son, hopefully coming home. So I just, Andy Catlin, when I found him, he was 2 years out, and I said, I think you should help me with this book now. And he canceled his vacation and did the book. It's wonderful. And so we're very excited about it.
So, okay. So the last question I have before I ask how we can get the book is about your son. So how many years ago was that? When
18 years ago.
So how's your son now? What does he think of the book? Like, I mean, this is obviously part of his life.
Yeah, I actually, one of the reasons I waited is I wanted him to be old enough. He's 25 now. I wanted him to be old enough to ask him and say, are you okay with this? And I sat down and told him, I said, I won't publish it if you say no. I mean, because this has a lot to do with you. I could publish it and never make the correlation, but it's where the book came from. And he said, it's okay, Dad. So he's doing much better. I'm really proud of him. You know, he still has his struggles, but I mean, he said to me, he goes, look, one of my sisters is a doctor, another is a international bestselling author, another works for movies, another's gonna be a doctor of a pharmacy. It's like, how do I compete with that? And I said, Michael, you've climbed bigger hills than all of them. Had greater struggles. I go, I am just as proud of you as I am them, if not more so. So you know, as a parent, I don't need to get my ego needs out of what my children do. It's like I have my own. And as my wife says, it's much more fun having a famous daughter than it is a husband. But you know, I'm proud of them, and I'm proud of every one of them and what they've overcome and what they've done. You know, and that's you know, I guess that's how a dad should be. Right? We love our kids.
Absolutely, yeah. And like I said, I was just curious because obviously, you know, I knew your son would be much older now, and as you said, how he viewed it. So you answered that question beautifully. So I guess then, obviously, the big question is for people that want to get the book, when, how can they get it already, and how do they grab it?
Yeah, you can go to Amazon.com. It's there. My son lives in a tree. Okay, or if you go to my website, it's richardpaulevans.com, and go to the store, you can order it there. If you do that, we actually double the royalty to Christmas Box House. So they make double the amount of money. So instead of giving it to Amazon, we actually give it to the kids. So it's a little more work to put in your information, obviously, but you know, we're very careful with that information, and you know, it's a good way to buy it. So either way, go to richardpaulevans.com, my name, and just click on the store, or just go to Amazon. My son lives in a tree.
So I guess this is the bonus question. If can people order multiple copies when they go on your website to order? Like, can they select?
Oh yeah, they all. In fact, most people do.
Okay. I'm asking that because I'd like to order maybe 10 copies for our listeners and do some sort of contest or something like that. So I just wanted to make sure I can do, because you said it's a lot of work when you do them one by one. So if I can select a certain number, that's easier.
I'll tell you what, I'll look for your name. When they come through, I'll autograph them for you too to give away.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That or ask for that, but that's amazing. I would love that. And like I said, we'll do some sort of contest so we can give them away to our guests so people can sort of be in the loop. So if they're listening right now, they'll know that we're going to be running a contest soon. But Richard Evans, this has been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I knew it would be. I so appreciate you, honor you. I'm so glad you're putting this book out. I can't wait to share it far and wide, our newsletter, everywhere else. And I can't wait to be back at a timepiece retreat as well.
You know, they just filmed a horror movie there at my ranch.
You know what? So my girlfriend pointed it out to me. She saw it,
Yeah.
and she said, "I think that might be the same one we slept in." I don't know if
It was the same cottage you guys did.
really.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. It's just out of curiosity, did they approach you about and say, "Can we do a horror movie here?"
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I don't know if it was good or bad that we were in there before it happened. I don't know. I don't think it matters.
Oh my gosh, that's kind of creepy. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that was your cottage. It was based on my book, The Last Promise. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So amazing. Well, Richard, like I said, always a pleasure. Of course, people go to your website, they can find out the other things you're doing down the road as well. So I think that's probably a good hub to go. And then I know you're pretty active on Facebook too, so they can find you there as well, correct?
Exactly. Yes.
Awesome. Richard, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure. You take care.
You too.